Hello, everybody. My name is Liz Reed. I'm the head of the Adult Services Department at the Morrill Memorial Library in Norwood. Thank you for tuning in to join us tonight. For those of us who are on the Zoom call, you're going to notice that you're muted tonight, but do feel free to please take full advantage of the chat. In fact, there's going to be a few opportunities throughout the evening for you to chat to us, and you'll see what I mean as we get going, but do type in questions as you think of them. If they're not answered during the program, we will definitely answer them at the end. So make full use of that chat. So this evening's program is about a very important topic, environmental justice, not just locally, but also globally, who it affects and what should we be thinking about when we're thinking about environmental justice. We actually have a Norwood resident as our presenter this evening. He's a lecturer in Boston at the Youth Justice and Advocacy program at BU's Wheelock College. He's a graduate of Northeastern University's Law School and the graduate program in criminal justice. Before we turn it over to Willie, though, who you may recognize from Norwood Day, he's our beloved MC for Norwood Day events. I'm going to turn things over actually to some representatives from Progress Norwood. So Kate, if you could take it away.
Sure, thank you so much. Thanks, Liz, and thank you so much to Willie Rodriguez for speaking tonight, to Susan Clare with Together Yes for partnering with us on this, for really originating this sustainability series and letting us partner with her. And we're really excited about this topic. It's super important. I think you're going to find that it's local and global, which Willie's going to touch on. Just a little bit about Progress Norwood is that we are organized around local action, community action. So we have 3 or 4 teams of working teams. One is around local politics. One is around environmental issues, so environmental justice, and one is around cultural competency. And this issue tonight is where those 2 teams overlap. So if you're interested in finding out more or helping us out or just keeping in the know, please check us out at progressnorwood.org. We're also on Facebook and Instagram. So thank you so much for having us, and we look forward to this and the next one.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Liz. Good evening, buenas noches, like we say in Spanish. It's a privilege to be here talking to my community. As Liz mentioned, I have to do something here. Okay, here we are. So I've been in Norwood for 27 years now. My wife is Diane Cialetta, and I have 3 children. One is married now, and another one is out of college as well. And I have my daughter now is in her 2nd year, and they grow fast. So I normally people know me, and they all went to Norwood High School. And you might know them. They're some of my children, and some of you may have been their teachers if you're school teachers. Nicholas Rodriguez, Anthony Rodriguez, who's a great singer, and he's aspiring to be in musical theater in Broadway. So he'll be on his way to New York in January. And then my daughter is at Northeastern University studying human services and criminology, something not too far from the tree, because he's the apple of her father's eyes. Some people know me as the Norwood DJ, Norwood Day DJ. And also you're somewhat Norwood resident DJ, because I've done a lot of proms, and I've done a lot of graduations, and I've done a lot of fundraisers for those good causes when we have them at the Elks Club and so forth. I go by the tagline of DJ Prof. That was given to me by one of the members of the Hyannis Sound when he found out I was a professor, so I took that one in. I'm also well known as the son-in-law of the legendary Andrew Cialetta, which was the former Balf School principal, and he's my father-in-law, and he's one of the greatest men I've ever met. So he is, and shout out to Nani also as well, who's my mother-in-law. But people also don't know that I have a life outside of Norwood, and I've had a life outside of Norwood. And most of my work both has been in the criminal justice arena. I often am involved in agendas regarding mass incarceration, decarceration, addressing racial and ethnic disparities, issues of equity and justice and social justice that I do. I teach that now. I take my 35 to over 35 years in the criminal justice system, both criminal justice and juvenile justice, working in New York City and in the Bronx, and in Boston as well, with colleagues at the national level to try to transform and reform our criminal justice system. So that's been my life outside of Norwood, and I love to bring that experience to the classrooms and teach. Some of the lived experiences of the cases we study are often cases that I've dealt with in real life as well as, and I like the young people who I consider the future of our communities to be the change agents and reformers of our communities for the future. So I always tell, when I talk about an issue, I always take my own life story, as well as I like to tell, provide some pictures to give some people food for thought. So we're going to have a little interactive exercise here. All I want you to do is to process the picture I show you on the screen, and then tell me if you can identify the location. And for those who are on Zoom, for those who are at home, they may not be able to respond, but the ones who are on Zoom, can you put the location you think it is on the chat? And we'll probably show you 2 slides per location, so that way it gives you time to identify this. And I'll tell you a little bit about each one, because that is a work that I've done both outside of the country and as well as in the United States. So can you identify the following locations? Okay, I want you to look at that for a minute. What does it look like to you? Okay, can anyone guess where this is? And I think I'm going to solicit the help of those who can see the chat, because I'm sharing my screen in PowerPoint. And
All right. We have a couple of responses that have come in. Indonesia, India. Got a few guesses for India. Puerto Rico. Oh, somebody responds that it looks like a landfill, but beyond that, they're really not sure.
Yeah.
Ooh, Texas border. Interesting guess. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, let's see where it is. It's Guatemala. It's Guatemala, and it is a landfill. It is the largest trash dump in Central America. And in my journeys in the last 5 years, I've gone to Guatemala with my students to help bring about, to go to what we call Safe Passages, which is a program started by one of the WheeLock alumni, a young woman called by the name of Hanley Denning, who was a social worker. She was unfortunately in an accident and a car crash in Guatemala, and they had given her a procession like Mother Teresa, because she went out there to work with the indigenous people of Guatemala. These are the people that work in that trash dump, which is like if you were watching the Grand Canyon of toxicity and trash in Guatemala. And there are people, indigenous people by the thousands, who work in there, in the hundreds, in that trash dump, and recycle about a ton of garbage every year from them. They recycle them, and then they earn about 30 quetzales per day working in those conditions, which are very dangerous and risky and hazardous to the health. There was a methane fire there about 10 years ago, and they banned the young children from working with their parents there. And this young woman who went from Wheelock down there started a school in order to try to get these kids from not repeating the same vicious cycle of their parents and trying to make a living. They're trying to survive because it's one of the poorest communities. It's called the Red Zone, the MS-13, which is a gang that we have heard many cases in the past number of years, operates from there. There's extortion and assassinations. Those are the conditions that have been caused by the environmental damage. It's owned by a private family that's had it since 1953. So it's about 1.5 miles of trash in there. When we go there, they don't allow us around the perimeter because it's very dangerous. That's one.
Willie, actually,
Yes.
the audience would like to see that again. They're
Sure.
interested to see the photos again. Thank you.
Sure. So this is where they actually, some of them live off the trash, and people, when they congregate, when the trash trucks go into this site, as you can see, the children, you see she has a baby in the box. This was probably before 2004, when they started banning under 14 to work with their families there. 30 quetzales is $3 in American dollars. And the largest dump in Latin America is in Brazil. So we have a lot of global, these trash has global significance, because if they have a fire, and when it rains in those dumps, it becomes a mudslide and landslide, and people have died and are buried inside these trash dumps. And these are things we don't always see. And then we question why some of the young indigenous poor people and families are trying to cross the border, because they're trying to leave this place where there's a lot of violence as well. But our alumni went down there. See, that's how big it is. And they've established, the school has grown to serve now about 700 kids. They're trying to get them to the pathway of education so they can earn more money. And if they get their high school degree, they end up earning and getting out of this vicious cycle. But their parents still work in there, and they live in squatters' homes right around the perimeter here. Here's another, what about this? What place is that? Somebody already identified it before, so they might want to say it again.
Oh, Puerto Rico.
That's right. It's Puerto Rico.
Yeah, everybody's got it. Yep.
It's Puerto Rico. I'm going to go back over here a little bit. So this is where about 30 something members of my family lived. I was very much involved in the Hurricane Maria relief efforts. This was Hurricane Maria's damage. The island of Puerto Rico has ecological significance to the United States. It's always been the East Coast defense of the United States. We are still a colony. We're considered citizens, but we don't vote for the president who can send us to war. That's usually an editorial I have, because I'm very proud of my heritage in Puerto Rican. And we often are somewhat when these disasters hit us, we're treated very much like second-class citizens. So environmental justice becomes a significant advocacy tool for us to really bring about sustainable models and investment into the island, so we can reconstruct the island every time. But as you know, Hurricane Maria also exposed, like they did recently in Texas, the grid, which was a weak infrastructure in Puerto Rico, because, you know, the island is in heavy debt. So there hasn't been any repair. But this has been now, since Maria, an opportunity to develop some solar, wind, and water. As you know, those are the three elements, natural elements, that Puerto Rico has abundance of. There's also the fact that these natural disasters always expose some of the toxicity that lays in the land. So some of the landfills and some of the Superfund dollars that came out to for the waste that companies do, because there's a lot of pharmaceuticals and electrical companies that operate in Puerto Rico, but they've been very negligent about contaminating our waters and our rivers down there. And that causes diseases, and these kinds of disasters also cause illnesses, mercury in the fish, those kinds of things that create these kinds of natural disaster. And anything happens to the island, and I say it's ecologically significant to the Caribbean, because anything happens to that island, it also affects Dominican Republic and Cuba and the Virgin Islands, because Puerto Rico is a center, a place where a lot of sort of natural resources are grown, and a beautiful place to see. But, you know, I always say that we get minimum wage for the people who serve the people who take advantage of tourism down there and the capitalists who come in and pay exorbitant amount of monies to stay there and live there. And I always say we consume what we don't produce, and but we don't control our destinies. And there's a real strong environmental movement that I started with one of my brother who lives in the East Coast. The hurricane came in right where my father lives. So that was a really tense time for me during a time that, but I'm down there traveling with down there to build some sustainable models as well. Let me go to this one. So let me show you real quick. So can anyone identify that one?
Okay, we have a Texas guess.
You're close.
I'm gonna guess New Orleans.
Yes, yes. It is the 9th Ward. If you remember Katrina, this is the 9th Ward. And because it's located in a cul-de-sac, when Katrina hit, it wasn't as powerful as what we got Maria from the category, but because they have a lot of canals and cul-de-sacs, and it's pretty much the French Quarter is the one on the hill. This is the 9th Ward. Mainly 90% or 99% of the people who live here were African Americans. And if you recall the stories of Katrina, there was FEMA took a long time before getting there. I spent the last also 10 years going with students to help rebuild New Orleans, and I got to really create a family and work with a group down there that's called the Friends and Families of Incarcerated Louisiana Children. And there was an incident a couple of years ago that included one of the gangs that existed in this area, mostly 16, 17, 18 years old, and they came out and had a shootout during a Mother's Day parade in New Orleans in May. One of the things why I say that is because in many of these environmental, when we allow these, we don't pay attention of the contamination of our lands and our environment, it can cause a lot of health hazards for young children. And what happened during Katrina was it also exposed asbestos and lead when the water then subsided, and a lot of the kids were still playing in the streets and the yards and everything, and some of the little ones were chewing on whatever they could find. This is a very impoverished area. What then that causes is a trickle effect down the road where it will traumatize the brain, and it also will have some both mental and physical implications in development for young children. And oftentimes it'll also stunt the nerve of that causes you to be happy. So it traumatizes the brain to get you aggressive. And why I said the Mother's Day shooting is because the community then started trying to figure out, why were these young people so angry? Why were they shooting out like without any regard to the fact that it was a Mother's Day parade, and that was, the sanctity that these cultures hold is the mother. And it was the community who figured it out and said to them, there's a medical issue here. And those kids were, since they came from this range, and it was 10 years from the time Katrina hit, they made the correlation that they were exposed to the contamination and the chemicals of that time, and the asbestos and lead poisoning that caused them to be angry and shoot each other down the road 10 years down. So there are communities who are doing environmental justice work, but they're also doing the problem solving of figuring this out through a different lenses. We often look at criminal and violence issues through a criminal lenses, and we say, well, let's let public safety take care of it. But we never look at it from a public health perspective, and violence is a public health crisis. And we need to look at more medical models of intervention in order to do this. But this is based on environmental circumstances, our ecosystems being affected that affect our children as well. Good guess on New Orleans. So let's see, let's go to this one. All right, that was the 9th Ward. So these are, can anybody identify this area? I'll give you a guess. It's near here.
Mattapan, somebody's guessing.
Yeah, you're close. It's Dorchester. It's Upham's Corner. It's Upper Corner, and I say brownfields because does anybody know what brownfields are? Brownfields are normally places where you have land, and they call it brown because it goes from green to brown because of contamination by industry. They dump, you normally are the junkyards, the streets are cracked, there's holes, dangerous risk in these areas. So we called them brownfields, and there was a movement in the 80s and 90s, especially in Dorchester, where, and also it happened in the South End, when in Villa Victoria, where the Puerto Rican community is, in 1969, they took over brownfields there from the city. They proposed plans to redevelop it because they were saying that in these impoverished communities, and that's how the environmental justice movement started, because of communities of color, and it tries to address this in this kind of manner through an environmental justice lenses. We're getting hit a lot with the worst housing, the dilapidated junkyards, and the dumping in their neighborhoods. So they decided to take control of that. And in this particular area, Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative is the national model on resident leadership. They took over the community. They've redeveloped it. Now, if you go around there, people have home ownership over some single family homes. They have rental, medium income, low income housing that's very suitable, safe, and healthy. And they work together with the community safety task force and so forth. So this is one model where you turn the environmental brownfield into a green field, and you have youth working on food projects and doing a lot of wonderful things there. All right, so this is the Upham's Corner area. So I have one last one, and this is, I'm going to show you this. Okay, can anybody guess where that is?
We've got a Chicago guess, Harlem, Bronx, NTC. I'm guessing that's supposed to be NYC.
Okay.
Yeah, Harlem, Bronx, Chicago.
Yes.
In
Well,
the 70s.
the person who said the Bronx, they're correct. So I'm going to turn to this really quick. All right, so this is where it gets close to home. This is where I grew up in the 1970s. This is a place where it was compared to, if it was like if there was a civil war, the civil war in Lebanon at the time, when Jimmy Carter came to visit this site, he compared it to a war-torn country. The South Bronx, at the point where I lived, was the poorest area in the United States. There was 11,000 fires in 1 year, committed by arsonists, landlords who hired arsonists, sometimes drug addicts, to burn these buildings down. As a 10-year-old and 11-year-old, this is what I saw out my window every day, Company Engine 82 coming in to bring down a fire, and always going to sleep at night thinking that my building will be the next one, with my mother and 3 sisters, because my mother had separated from my father. We came from Puerto Rico, right smack dab into what they call Fort Apache, the Bronx. This was the one the movie was made, although the movie was sensationalized by Paul Newman at that time and everything, and it really put the Bronx in a bad light and its people. There was a gang in every block, and most of these buildings had as lead. They were like havens of places where you would get the high indicators of asthma, early infant mortality. It was the highest crime area at one point. So it was a tough place for families, impoverished families. And this was due to the fact that also a phenomenon called white flight, which was, this used to be more of a neighborhood where Jewish and Italians used to live. And then when they built Co-op City, which oftentimes you can see Co-op City when you go down 95, when you enter the Bronx, going down New York City to New Jersey, the first thing you see on your left-hand side is these big complexes that look like cooperative apartments. That's where all the white people moved, and they left this neighborhood to African Americans and Puerto Ricans at that time. And I was a kid that was, and my sisters and I grew in this kind of environment. I think what allowed me to persist and survive this environment was the fact that I had a loving mother, and I worried about my sisters, and there was a level of resiliency, which is sometimes really it takes a lot, and it takes also some adult to believe in you too. And I had some good adults, a counselor and a teacher that believed in me, that I never thought I could go to Fordham University or even come out. And now I am in a white ivory tower like Boston University and a professor. So the environmental damage, you tend to go to these neighborhoods, and this is some of the things that's more appropriate to even when we correlate it with Norwood and neighborhoods and things like that. When you go to these neighborhoods, sometimes you get also the worst when it comes to the food. Normally the stores that operate out of here, you can tell an inner city neighborhood like this because you see liquor stores, you see check cashing places. You don't see any banks. You don't see any of the official businesses you see in the upper north, better places of the Bronx or neighborhoods that we have around here. But you see also the food that has the fat, the salt, and the sugar. That in itself is an environmental hazard. Again, there are stages of development young people are going through, and to be exposed to these kinds of environment is really detrimental to your health. And not only that, it leads to death as well. The other person, I'm sorry.
I don't mean to interrupt, but is there any way you could turn the light on in your room that you're in?
I'm so sorry. I forgot that. Yeah, there we go. I am so sorry. Yeah, I'm coming from the dock. That's my undercover stuff. I didn't want people to see me yet. So, anyway, yeah, I am so sorry about that. But anyway, these are the kinds of, I show these pictures because these are the kinds of conditions that people in inner city and many in impoverished neighborhoods go through. And these are the circumstances that some, because of due to also discrimination, racial segregation, housing segregations, policies and rules, and also, corruption and mostly people who are in power, who own these places and environments, do not care about the people, their health and their quality of life. And just because one person is poor does not mean that they don't desire a good quality of life. I think that sometimes we tend to label these communities and the people as not wanting to get out of those cycles of poverty. They just need to see it. If I didn't get out of New York City, I wouldn't have known what the rest of the world would have looked like if I would have not gotten out of the city. For me, it worked. For many, it doesn't. The other person that we call ourselves survivors from these neighborhoods, and the other person, at least I say 2.5 famous people came out of my neighborhood. One is Hughie Jones, who used to be the dean of social work here, and he was also had a show. He used to come on 5 on 5. I don't know if anybody saw that show before, but Hughie Jones, who came out of the same high school I did, Morris High School in the Bronx. And then Sonia Sotomayor, who's our first Puerto Rican Supreme Court justice. She came out of this, and when I met her and I brought her to Wheelock, she shook my hand and said, "It's nice to meet another survivor." It tells you there are intrinsic resilient factors that people can put together in these, and you sometimes say, how do certain people survive these environments? We didn't have advocates during that time. We didn't have environmental justice as much. Now all these neighborhoods, there's a lot going on in revitalization of these neighborhoods. And I just wanted to give you, this is where the academic part begins a little bit. I wanted to give you a sense of what is environmental justice. Right there, the definition says that environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. That's the EPA definition. I also look at it as improving our quality of life and health through an environmental protection lenses. And I say that very, because when you take on, when you want to take, environmental justice to me is giving voice to the people who don't have voice, so they can seek redress through the legal mechanisms and through the policy mechanisms that we can use, and to the civic mechanisms that we can use to ensure that people of all races, and I consider them everyone important, people who are poor, whoever it is, a resident, is treated fairly and appropriately by those. I'm also doing this with a race and equity lens definition into it, because there is a lot of these communities of color have been affected very much by the environmental criminality of many of the people who have used it for the purposes of gaining profit out of these. In Katrina, they started charging $20 for water during a time of despair, and I always state that there's a moral issue to that. When you think about that, a person is desperate to have water because the water was contaminated in Katrina, and the vendors are charging them $20 per. And we have those people that take advantage of people's humanity during these times. And environmental justice is a civil rights principle as well. It's there to really protect people, and hope that we can really transform people's lives by advocating for what's good and what's best for them. Here's what environmental racism is. This is Benjamin Chavez, the executive director of the United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice. Describe environmental racism as racial discrimination in environmental policymaking, in the enforcement of regulations and laws, and the targeting of communities of color for toxic waste disposal, and the citing of polluting industries. All the places I showed you also had been subjected before to this kind of waste disposal and polluting of its communities, and also on the neglect of them, because you don't always used to get the inspections that you get when you're doing your inspections at home here, and you're doing your inspections communities who are more well-to-do, or even middle-class communities get more attention at these, because there also is an activist and a very active community in these in the suburban neighborhoods than they are in more inner city environments. Examples of environmental justice also include inadequate access to healthy food, inadequate transportation when you have to go miles to get a bus to get to work, those kinds of things, air and water pollution, unsafe homes, dilapidated public housing, and contaminated rivers. We also have the impact of these damages in terms of mental illness and trauma, cancer, leukemia. There are many cases of civil remedies, civil cases that have emerged over the United States that have led to industries paying settlements because they didn't bother to follow the safety measures and the safeguards that are put in there by the regulatory bodies. So they end up dumping in places where remote, they think it's remote, but it may be a place where people are living. Lead poisoning. Asthma is usually one of the main causes in terms of in public housing. That's very, very prominent in communities in low-income communities, asthma. Gas poisoning through methane, fires, those kinds of things, the smoke that we inhale based on the chimneys and the pipes that the companies put out. Brain damage, it can cause very much brain damage, lung issues, and congestion. All right, and I just wanted to encapsulate by saying, because this is a long subject, it takes a long time to talk about environmental justice. I could have talked about for a whole hour or two on each experience I've had, but I took on I say this because I took on this sort of environmental justice, not because I'm an environmental lawyer. I'm more in criminal law. So if I were to do environmental justice work, usually you would partner with an environmental lawyer who's more familiar with the laws, the Clean Water Act, those kinds of things, and help build it. But you don't always need a lawyer. Environmental justice really is about a community coming together. So they can do their part. on their own, but it's really about the community. And I love mobilizing communities. I've worked with all these communities, and I've worked to help them really organize themselves to then take on the issues that they feel that are affecting their environment, and partner, because this is, you can't do this alone. You have to do a cross collaborative partnership, cross agency, cross goals. The saying, you establish common goals around how you're going to tackle this. Massachusetts, we have a very interesting process here, because you could do citizen legislation. You could submit your own legislation around environment and submit it to the legislature. And there are many advocate groups, which I'll talk about a little bit in a few moments. There are many advocate groups that partner with others. There are many models out there. Massachusetts, even though we are pretty much a state that has a lot of good, we got the center of hospitals and education, we don't always do a good job at educating the public around these issues. And I will talk a little bit about that. But how do you begin if you want to take on an environmental justice agenda or an initiative around this? It's important. We're celebrating Earth Day and the Earth, and where there's a lot going on with the environment. So it's really difficult to pinpoint what should we take on and what should we do. Sometimes you have a local issue that you want to take on, and there is government involvement in that local issue, and you might want to start working on getting to partner with that government entity in order to ensure that your neighborhood stay closely. But anyway, how to begin this process is you start in your own backyard. You organize, mobilize, and educate, and you do your homework. I think what I've always done is when I've worked with communities, I've always said that don't always look at a problem. And I usually use this because I've been in criminal justice for so long. So every time we have a problem with violence or crime and everything, we often defer to the police immediately to resolve this issue. But this is not just a police issue. The police are important, but they're not the ones always responsible for public safety. They're responsible, they have to protect and serve. And we often say, okay, so I'm going to defer it to the police, right? So they'll settle that problem. But they need also the community's help. So I've worked with police and community to try to bring them together to develop relationships, because the police can enforce things that you can't do as a citizen, but you're also should take on ownership over the community safety of your own neighborhood. You should be able to fundamentally adopt a community safety or a health safety measure for your own community. So that way we don't defer the problem all the time. So I always tell the people I'm teaching and training is look at going at the problem in a different way. And that's why I chose environmental justice, because I said I was looking at crime and safety as let's look at the entities who are doing this and let's make them responsible. And they tend to be overwhelmed, especially if you're a city cop. They tend to be overwhelmed with work. But we need to start taking ownership over our own lives and ownership over the way we work together to ensure that we improve the quality of life, not only for ourselves, but for our children. That includes our, actively educating our community to be able to say, here, we're going to give you this education so you know how we can address it, and you can come together with us so we can address that. So if you have somebody committing violations, environmental violations, you can join together and work together, but you need to educate that community. And I say this very carefully because as you know, they are now designating certain environmental justice zones. These are zones that normally carry, they're predominantly the communities of color. And oftentimes, environmental activists mostly come from the white community. And they often say, how do we approach these communities to work with us? And that takes on, and I noticed was the earlier mention around cultural competency. And for me, it becomes easy to work with my Latino community because I can speak Spanish and I can translate and I can serve as a buffer to the people who have the expertise, who normally are people who don't speak the language of that person. It could be an immigrant and then a community that speaks their native language is something else than English, something other than English. And so when you're trying to, and I think it's important that if you're looking at doing something for an environmental justice zone, that you start looking at it from that cultural lenses as well. How do I get to understand and appreciate that community and get them involved, because they need to get involved. We just can't, oops, sorry about that. We need to continue to get involved, and we need to continue to communicate, because those communities feel isolated in many cases, and they feel it's them, and they sometimes don't have enough information to activate themselves to be part of a process, part of the solution. And I think that's one of the things, I think if you're going to take on environmental justice initiatives, or you're going to take on a local project on your own, or you even want them to get involved with getting the community better, then we need to bridge communications with each other. We need to be able to talk to each other and be able to do that. Some of the other things you can do is, it's promote, give voice to the things that promote energy and climate resiliency in the houses of worship. We talk about the churches, the places where promote healthy homes and programs to address hazards such as lead paint, mold, allergens, and asthma triggers. A small group can do quite a bit. They can be vigilant and keep an eye on ensuring that both commercial and residential are abiding by their OSHA obligations, inspections, etc. I mean, we have a lot of small businesses. We like to support it. I did some work in Lowell, Massachusetts with, at that time, it was Superintendent Ed Davis. He became the commissioner of Boston Police. And we were trying to deal with an issue with a community, the Cambodian community, which is quite large. Lowell has the second largest Cambodian community in the United States. The first one is in Long Beach, California. And there was a communication gap between that community and the police and the town and the people and the leadership there. And they wanted to communicate to get that community active in public safety and community safety. And the church is very different in the Cambodian community. This is what I mean about the way certain cultures deal with these things. These communities are often isolated. They don't feel part of the fabric of engagement. They focus inward rather than outward. They're not as active as the Black churches in Boston, so you can't confuse them with us. So there's that nuance. How do we communicate and make a community feel like they belong? And how do they get them become part of also, again, solving these issues? And most of the time, these communities know there's crime. So we might not want to go the crime way. We might want to go the quality of life way, maybe fix some things that their neighborhood is lacking, like the light fixture so they can cross their kids to the girls and boys clubs. Or they can, you can help the small businesses understand that if they dump the food outside and they don't put it in the dumpster or the bins, that it can't be picked up, and the trash makes the neighborhood look like a sore. And whether you're poor or not, you don't like your neighborhood. These neighborhoods, sometimes the most impoverished, look like a sore to those same people who live there. So it depresses them, gets in that. So those are the kinds of things that you need to know that are ways of clues of trying to bring a community together, to use someone who can communicate with them, who can then make it a lot easier for you who are working on this initiative or trying to address it, to do that. And then there's, there are the Community Task Force of Concerned Citizens that serve as advocates for underrepresented communities. There's some in Massachusetts. I know that I think Norwood has a sustainability group. That's a way of doing subsets and subcommittees of different community parts of the town that they can come together and then have a larger steering committee that focuses on different little community projects. And I also say that when you're doing environmental justice, this is an area that our young people, my children, have been involved with. I love to activate the young people. They have a lot more creative ideas, and they can come out with plans. Sometimes I think that, we need to get out of the way as adults sometimes and let these young people thrive, because they come out with the most innovative, creative ways of resolving our environmental issues, and we should give voice. I've seen some of the Norwood meetings on the NPA on the cable channel, where I've seen some young people participated, and when I hear them talk, I say, wow, they have a lot to say. And I can tell you there's a lot of talent in our town, and we need to activate our youth and get them more involved in creating a quality of, because it's going to help them down the road if they decide to settle in Norwood and beautify and continue to improve our neighborhoods. So think about our young people. They are quite the asset and a good source for us. When you educate the public, I think these are of course, you have the federal laws. These are the federal environmental laws, National Environmental Policy Act, the EPA, the Comprehensive Environmental Response, that's the Superfund, the Clean Air Act, Clean Water. And then there is the Massachusetts laws also, and the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, which is it's the EPA of Massachusetts. And there is the Associations of Conservation. There is also common law, and when I mention that, it's because when let's say this normally applies to property owners who see that they own some land and somebody's dumping on them, they can sue those for that. So there are mechanisms, both legal and policy-wise, that can be used to really push an environmental justice agenda. There's these associations, the Mass Climate Action Network, the Climate Justice Alliance in New England, and Alternatives for Community and Environment is definitely one organization that, if you go to their website, this is the organization that's really doing some serious environmental justice work in the city. And it is to address the issues of structural racism that has existed even in our environmental policies and laws. One final thought before I open up to questions. Just because, and again, I went like a paintbrush on this. Just because we live locally doesn't mean we can't think globally. So part of what I was doing with the first few slides and showing you part of the world and outside of the country is that just because we're in Norwood doesn't mean that we can't think the way those sectors are doing in order to protect their environment. So we can apply everything from climate change activities to beautifying our neighborhoods, planting more trees, more oxygen. So global thinking and local action. That's a good, I stole that from somebody, so that's not from me. Remember, whatever small part you can do for the environment will go a long ways if we all do it together. You can't do this alone. We also must think about each other as one human race that works to preserve our fundamental right to live a healthy and productive life with dignity and respect. And let's work to protect our environment for future generations to enjoy regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, lifestyle, class, and circumstance. And I leave you with that thought. And that's my presentation for tonight. So I'm open for questions and I'll stop sharing. So.
Well, thank you very much. Oh, yes, so we have some comments starting to come in here. If we were in person, I'd say big round of applause for Willie, but you can all do that at your own home.
We can do the deaf culture. This is the deaf culture. This is the way to clap to be mindful of our deaf culture. Yeah, so.
Wonderful. Oh, and some people found the Zoom emoji clap. That's great.
Oh, yeah.
And so Kate Sibbing Dunn did throw the link in the chat if anybody wants to grab it, I believe. Kate, which one's that for real quick?
That's for the Alternatives for Community, ACE, the Environmental Justice Org in Massachusetts. I looked that up, so I just want everybody to have that link. It looks looks like a great resource. So I thought I would share that out.
Great.
And then Willie, some of us were just wondering if there was any issues in Norwood specifically that you're aware of in terms of environmental justice and our community, if there's anything that you know.
Well, there's not that I'm aware, but I do know that there is an issue with an environmental justice zone and particular industries here in Norwood. Let me just say this: Norwood is and it's always fascinated me because there are parts of Norwood when I look at. And so if you remember the dump I showed you in Guatemala? So if you were to look at our dump, and you were to expose it, that's probably what it would look like inside, right? Because that one's exposed. This one's covered, and it has a lot of protections around it. It has the lights and it has the warnings and everything. But we do have to be vigilant over that. And one thing I say that whether sometimes these environmental hazards are not seen, you can't see them. You can smell them, but you can't see them. And I think that part of what I can say is that while we may not see it in the open, these environmental issues, that there are many things that we have to be vigilant. I mean, when I go and walk around the creeks and all that stuff, I detest seeing people dump garbage into the waters, people leaving their beer cans and those kinds of things. That all contaminates. And we have some beautiful, one thing about in my place is that a lot of birds come in because we have a lot of beautiful, exotic birds. We have coyotes coming in. We have all these kinds of animals who are getting adapted to urban settings now, right? So we're trying to mingle both, even with our animals and our creatures, and but we need to also be mindful that when you have dense communities, and Norwood is dense, but it's a place everyone wants to live. And part of the hazards that we have is human development. You got natural disasters that come in at one shot and they can destroy an environment. They also regenerate themselves, right? But human development can't, when damage is done to the environment by humans, it can't regenerate itself, because it's based on minerals and toxins and chemicals that we can't take back. There have been, the Exxon spill. After Katrina, there was the Gulf spill, and it killed so many animals off the Gulf Coast, and so New Orleans and Louisiana got hit double that. But we have to look for also things that we don't see, and make sure that also the inspections are being done by the environmental organizations, by the agencies that are here responsible for that. So, and I know we have commissions in the town. We have many town meetings where people speak out, and I encourage citizens, if they see something that's not kosher when it comes to the environment, that's not, I actually didn't say that's a lack of a better term. I want to take that kosher word back because I'm very sensitive about the narrative. So that's not right when it comes to contaminate, when it comes to something that's going to destroy to speak out too. Environmental justice is about giving voice to things that are not seen and unseen, and especially in these communities, because oftentimes we have to also look at whether the communities of color are being also segregated in our own, not intentional way, but they often are diverted into several places. And I always look at that very carefully to see how does my town, where I live, represent the interests of communities of color. I'm very cognizant of that. I've done school to prison pipeline presentations at Norwood High on issues of racial and ethnic disparities, the overuse of discipline, the zero tolerance policies that affected that. And I think we need to continue to educate the entire community around that. We are going to be a very diverse community. It's growing at Norwood too. And we're going to have to navigate that, educate the new community that's coming in, try to interface very much together, work collectively to ensure that we protect Norwood as a town. That's where we are going to live. And we also have to look at it as, what do we want? What's best for our children and our families? So while they may be, we always have to look at the safe and health issues that we have. And we have some good, Chief Brooks is great He's very progressive thinking. I like the way he thinks. I've had interactions with him, and we have some good town people who really care about the families here and everything. But we also have to continuously educate. And I think the library in itself is the hub now of the sustainability topic and agenda that's going on around the country, where the libraries are providing that information. It's too bad that we're in virtual, because I love going to that library. And even when I was reading some legal books, I go up there, I go to the reference section. It just reminds me of a really nice place in Haven where I can get education. So the more information there is, the more you get to know those communities and what they need in terms of reading materials, whether it's in their own language, so they understand what are their protections. A lot of landlords tend to exploit renters and things like that. So we have to look at that, and they might not be taking care of those facilities, and there might be some health hazards for children and families there. So.
I have so many different directions I can go with what you were just talking about. Don't give me an opportunity to plug the library, because I will. It just occurred to me that if there is a situation where the EPA comes in, for instance, and cleans up a site, they're required to make that information publicly available. And the way many corporations, EPA, what have you, choose to make that information publicly available is by providing a hard copy to the library. So we do have a few of those on file if anybody's ever curious about, hey, whatever happened at such and such a site. We have that on file. You can come check it out.
Well, the other thing that shot up for me really quickly was the fact that you have to remember that there are public hearings on many cases when these organizations are like the EPA come in and are reviewing these companies. So they often call for testimony or comments in their hearings. And I would encourage, that's a process that people need to be constantly educated. I was a state house lobbyist, so I know that when I mobilized my communities over in Springfield, Holyoke, and all of that, I would educate them, put an action plan together. How are we going to advocate? Then we did a sort of leadership day or an environmental day, for example, at the State House, where the reps would come in. Also, that's what your legislative representative, Rogers, and your state senator are supposed to be doing as well. That is your representative in the State House. So they should be, that's why I mentioned setting up an environmental justice task group, or a group that focuses on that, on being the vigilant and the stewards of the safety issues of that affect Norwood.
And by the way, Katie threw in the chat a link for a map environmental justice communities. As Willie mentioned, there have been different communities and zones that have been designated. If you grab the link now, that's great. And if not, I'll include it when I send out the recording. Once that's posted online, I'll include the link as well, so you can check it out in the future. And we do have kind of a comment that's something to kind of chew on and think about, is that, as we are getting our own community healthier and more sustainable, we need to just keep in mind where our trash does go and where our energy comes from. So even if our own community is doing things responsibly for ourselves, there might be environmental justice zones that are negatively impacted by how we might be treating our waste and producing our energy.
Absolutely. And that's a very critical point, because it happens in every community, and that's one of the reasons why we end up with the brownfields. We end up with people moving, migration going out, and usually these communities are left to the people who are the poorest sometimes. I don't think that would happen in Norwood. I mean, the Norwood is a pretty much community, but again, we have to look at, how much capacity we have to also protect our environment. And that's not putting a cap on how many people can live, but it's just that we have to be using that space and sustaining. Sustainability is very important, because we advocate for these things, but we often, in some cases, in some places, we don't nail it down. And some of these communities then become gentrified, like they did in the city, and people keep being pushed out. The people who live there, who then they started fixing the neighborhoods, they worked so hard to rehabilitate them, reinvigorate them, and then comes into gentrification, because then you have real estate prospectors, the values go up, That happens a lot in Boston, and that happens in the South End in one of my communities there. So those are the kinds of things that happen. And it hasn't happened in the Bronx, so the Bronx was able to take control through some serious grassroots organizing. And now they're starting to move back into sort of the Bronx of old, you know.
So I had a question I jotted down as you were talking. So it's not something that was addressed. I don't know if you have any thoughts or opinions or tips on this topic, but for those who want to act globally, who maybe see an opportunity where they feel they could personally go and do good, I think the term used is voluntourism.
Mm-hmm.
How might, what might people keep in mind to make sure that if they do want to engage with that kind of work, to make sure they do it respectfully for the people who do live in the places that they're going to ostensibly help?
Right. That's a great question. I think one of the things that's been impressive about when I take my students down to like places like Guatemala is they come back and their lives are totally transformed. The reason why is because those young people in Guatemala and those children, which are beautiful children, they're beautiful, they're so beautiful. And the families there, they embrace you because you spend about 1,300 miles or 13,000 miles, whatever the miles is, to get there. And that to them shows them that they matter to you. And that's what they used to tell my students. They said, don't think that what you're doing there, you go in there the most genuine way you can. You don't take anything for granted and you don't assume anything, because oftentimes we make too many assumptions in this country. Sometimes to the level that we think, in some ways, I say this openly, we think we know it all. The world knows us better than we know them. We often take this arrogant approach that we know best by them. And that's not an approach you should use. You should be as humble. There's something called cultural humility. And you find out that people, even when we went to New Orleans, my students felt that the people would say, thank you for being here and helping us out, more so than they would appreciate the government. They prefer a private person helping them out. And so they will embrace you, but you need not pretend to them, because they know when you're not being genuine and you're going there just to see the sights, you know. And I always told my students, when, you know, whatever you do for them, it's going to matter 10 times more, and they'll never forget. And sure, every journey that I've gone to Colombia, Puerto Rico, Guatemala with my students. They've been able to appreciate that, and to prepare yourself too, because those are tough environments. Normally there are many church groups and many school groups, and they do these journeys. And I think our young people who, you know, Norwood has taken them to, you know, they took my daughter to the Dominican Republic, and they come back transformed. They come back more appreciative that we take for granted a lot here, including what we eat and our environment. And in those places, they have no choice because they are poor, but they're happy and they have nothing. So, you know, when you go there and prepare for that, it's a journey. And there are organizations that do a lot of good transitioning. So I would encourage people that if they wanted to do good and globally, that they go in and do it. But let me just say this. Do you have any book on the recommendation on the topic of environmental justice? Not now, because I haven't seen the seminal work yet on environmental justice. There's many programs, but I'll be more than happy to release some resources and books and do it and send it to the libraries for them to. So I'll do that. Again, you know, there is so much to do, but I say you don't have to go out of the country to find poverty. You don't go out of the country to find people of color and communities that need you. So if you can't do the global thing, then invest in locally.
Okay, that's great. We could go on. I have a feeling like this could go on for another hour at least. I'm trying to be respectful of everybody's time. So let's close out on a high note. Could you share with us a success story? And you can think of that small scale in terms of maybe a group that you've led, or larger scale, actually a big scale project that went well, that was handled right, that led to healthier, happier lives at the end?
Ooh, wow. I have so many. I mean, no, I don't have so many, but I have, you know, the most, ooh, that's a great project. Well, the thing,
Oh, I didn't prepare them ahead of time.
yeah, you know what? It's hard to do. I am involved with something big that's actually transforming people's mindset around young people. So I run this national initiative around the country. I started with an idea that if I could teach people who often adults that, you know, kids are, that they're worth the investment, that they should put their work around. These are youth work professionals. These are juvenile justice and child welfare workers around the country that I'm working with right now. And I've developed a curriculum to transform their mindset, to think of young people who are involved in the system are also have assets and strengths. Not to think deficit centered, because deficit centered thinking means I lock up the problem and I put it away, like they've done so many times. But now I'm seeing reaping the benefits of young people convincing adults that they should be given the opportunity. So I'm getting an entire professional field now, transforming them to a more positive youth development mindset. And that is in turn reforming the system in a different way. So now you're seeing the decrease of youth who are incarcerated are being released earlier because they're looking at more rehabilitative modes and more diversion and investment. And now that's affecting masses. And all that started was with a little curriculum that I developed for workforce development. And now, you know, I have commissioners around the country telling me this is a transformative curriculum that's going to change the dynamic of reform. So this little DJ that you call DJ Prof is reforming the entire juvenile justice system in this country. And I don't tell that to everybody, but I am doing it in a way that I'm seeing young people really being given a second chance and all of that. And the other significant things is that I am, in my own little way, creating the future youth social justice reformers at Boston University. Those young people that I educate have all told me that I've inspired them to really advocate and give voice to themselves first and to advocate effectively for others. So, you know, that's what I do. Outside of everything else I do when I get home, because then I got a house, I got to cook, I got to...
Andy cooks.
Yeah. Well, my wife is cooking more in the pandemic because she's got to get back because she works in the next room. so we're both you know, we're both very busy and everything like that. But we love to, you know, can't wait to, you know, I started gardening last year, so I'm now really into, you know, gardening and eating fresh stuff. So it's just so cool.
Well, that's great. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us tonight for Progress Norwood Together Yes, NCM and the library bringing environmental justice program with our very own Willie Rodriguez. Have a wonderful evening, everybody, and we will see you soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Take
Stay
care.
well, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much.